I'm glad that all of you braved the evening and didn't stay home to watch the Charger game. We have about half as many people as usual, so that's nice. And I'm a manufacturer's rep. What I do is I sell ways to make mechanical parts for products. Things like plastic molding, rubber molding, metal stamping, castings, sheet metal, machining. I've been in the industry for, as a manufacturer's rep for 30 years, but I actually started as an engineering secretary when I was 18 and then went back to school and got a degree at San Diego State. So I really know I've probably sold every way that you can make a mechanical part, but some didn't have a big enough market in San Diego, so they weren't worth my time. So we'll get going on that. Okay. As we know, I mean, judging by all of you here, there is no lack of ingenuity and creativity in the United States. The problem is getting that idea turned into reality and getting it made and getting it marketed so people know about it and you can sell it. So we need to have, you know, each year thousands of new products are invented, but many never receive patents, and even fewer are actually get into the production stream of a product out to the marketplace. Knowing how to use the technology to create a product doesn't necessarily mean you know how to manufacture it and get it to the market. So getting started. First of all, you got to recognize what you know and what you don't know. You need to utilize the expertise of other people for when you don't know how to do something or you don't have the expertise in knowing how to accomplish what you need to do to get your product into the market. So some of the experts that you might need to use are people like product design engineers. Maybe you have just a concept, but you don't have any ability to be able to design the product. So you need an independent design expert to work with you. Obviously, like Leslie is a licensing specialist or a patent specialist, you need to get that expertise help. Doing it yourself isn't going to do the job. You might need to have somebody help you with the material selection to select the right materials for your products. And then you need to have somebody that's willing to make the prototype. Thank goodness we have a lot of new little, you know, MakerBot kind of 3D printing machines that you can use yourself, but that doesn't necessarily produce a product a part that's going to be able to transfer into a production method to make your product. The little MakerBot machines, we had an inventor a couple years ago. He participated in the Inventors contest, and he had all these little tiny chunky plastic parts that he made himself on the MakerBot. Not a single one of them could be transformed into an injection molded plastic part. They were too chunky. You have to have uniform wall thicknesses to be able to make an injection molded plastic part for the production. So you need to have somebody also then that's going to be selected for your production manufacturing and for your marketing, because maybe you don't want to really start a company. How many people here in the audience are interested in actually starting a company versus just licensing their technology? Okay, so a few of you. So then you need to have even more expertise, because that's even more challenging. There really are many ways to manufacture a product. And you can have, you know, you can be setting up your own manufacturing site where you have everything that you make in-house, and very few companies are doing that anymore. You can set up the manufacturing company and then you can outsource different parts to different vendors to make for you. Or you can have where you are using different vendors and then you also get an assembly shop, a contract manufacturer to assemble your product. Some of them will even package it, and some of them will drop ship it to your market, whether it's a store or a retail store, etc. And then you have turnkey manufacturers that just do about everything for you, from selecting the packaging to getting it out into the stores. So there's a lot of varieties right now of what you can choose to do. So there's lots of different ways to make a specific part. In the plastic, some of the main ways of manufacturing a plastic part are, of course, machine parts, vacuum and pressure formed parts, which are usually larger parts that are too expensive to injection molding, blow molding, and rotational molding. And then you have composite parts that are used for a lot of aircraft kind of parts or golf clubs and different things like that. You know, we used to making surfboards and skateboards and different things like that. Rubber parts, so you can go all the way from cast urethane and cast silicone to compression molding, extruded, dipped plastic, which is the way you make plastic gloves, injection molded rubber, and liquid injection molding of rubber, and then transfer molding. So there's a lot of ways to make a rubber part. Metal, here's the most obvious ways to make it. You have all kinds of different castings, ranging from low volume, where it would be sand castings, permanent mold castings, rubber plaster mold castings, investment castings for a very complex geometry part, V-process molding, and die casting for higher volume. And the limits on some of these are the metals that you can do them in. So like die casting is not for for anything but aluminum and zinc and sort of a composite of those materials. You can't die cast ferrous metals. You have deep drawn or hydroformed. You can do electroform. Fabricated sheet metal, that's the most common way of making a larger part. And if you have the volume, you can transfer a sheet metal part into a metal stamping. You can have forged parts, laser cut parts, plasma cut parts, metal stampings, water jet cut parts. So there's a whole lot of ways, and the ways that you can make different parts. So there's a lot of variables that you need to consider when you decide which manufacturing process is the right process for making your part. What environment is your product going to be used in? Is it going to be an indoor product, an outdoor product? Is it going to be the industrial environment, a home environment, an office environment? So will it need any certifications like FDA approval or UL approval or mil-spec approval? And what is your production volume forecast? Because you don't want to pick the process that's going to have a higher piece price for production than you need to have to be able to sell your product at the rate that people will be able to pay. There's a certain set kind of range of pricing where you can sell your product. But you can sometimes ramp up from one method, like for example, vacuum and pressure forming of a housing for a product could be done when the volume is low. And then as you get your sales increase, you can convert that to an injection molded plastic housing. And so you have a lower piece price. Because vacuum and pressure forming, you can start out with 100 pieces, where nobody will even look at you for injection molding until you're into at least the low thousands. So those are some of the things you have to consider. Then we now have all this additive manufacturing that we can use, whether it's stereolithography or 3D printing or laser sintering, and also fused deposition modeling. These are the new technologies for making parts in various kinds of additive manufacturing. We have several companies, a lot of design firms will maybe have one of these kinds of processes, like stereolithography or 3D printing, or they'll have a combination. But there's actually a service bureau here in San Diego that we had present last year, Solid Concepts, that has all the machines, various ways to make all these kinds of additive manufacturing products. And we have even more of them up in the greater LA area that you would see if you went to the Medical Design or Pacific Design and Manufacturing show. They're exhibiting there. One of the bigger ones in Orange County is Source Graphics. So you can get a variety of things, but each one has its limitation. Laser sintering is good for aluminum and titanium. Well, it's not good. It uses ferrous metals and titanium. It cannot do aluminum. So that's the limitation on laser sintering. We have some local product development companies like Adrian's company, A Squared Technologies. We have other bigger firms like Clarity Design, DD Studio, D&K Engineering, Dynapack, Redpoint Engineering. Some of these companies like DD Studio or D&K Engineering provide like a whole portfolio of services. They will, if you have the money, they will take it from design to production, including the whole marketing package and the whole branding and everything. But this is for people that have quite a bit of money, and this is not necessarily used by brand new startup companies. It may be used by a company going into a new product for their company, where they use the services of a company like D&K, because they will handle the production. We actually have them as a customer because they've been handling all this, everything from the beginning for a product called Retail Inkjet Solutions. And so it started out with D&K, and now it's, you know, full production, and D&K is still handling everything for them. And of course, in San Diego now we have, for the last year and a half, we have a new location called the Maker Place. I had a tour of it last Saturday, and it's a really interesting place. It's almost like your dream garage. So it's a place where you can do a lot of things yourself. You can rent either time on a piece of equipment, or you can become a member of the organization to be able to use the equipment on a recurring basis, on a monthly basis. It has everything you can think of for fabricating things like woodworking, metalworking, electronics, embroidery, sewing, specialty tools. They have 3D printers, laser cutters, and engravers. And they had a booth at the Maker Fair. And they're almost like a little incubator because they also rent out some office space and storage space for your product. So it's really a really neat place. If you want to go take a tour of it, they have regular tours on weekdays and Saturdays. You can arrange a special one. Yes? Oh, good. This Saturday. Great. Very good. I highly recommend going to take a look at it because it's a fun place. They really got quite a variety of pieces of equipment that you can use, and you can take classes in how to learn how to use this equipment. So that's another good thing. Now, some of the machining equipment, you would probably need more than just, some classes to have the expertise to use some of their equipment. So we have incubator programs here in San Diego. ComNexus has their Evo Nexus incubator. It's a business incubator. It's a fully pro bono technology incubator providing full services including furnished office space, domain experts, and mentors. It's very difficult to get in. Probably about 1 out of every 25 companies that applies gets chosen. I think there's currently about a little over 30 clients of it, and it's been in existence now for probably about 3 years. It specializes, of course, into companies related to the communications and telecommunications industry. We have Connect, which is like an incubator without walls program. They have their Springboard program. It's a free program that assists companies in proving their business model and developing a compelling commercialization strategy. It's more for people, entrepreneurs that are building a company versus just inventing a product to license it. So if you actually want to build a company to have one product after another and be a real entrepreneur, Connect Springboard program would be the way you would want to go. So unfortunately, most entrepreneurs don't look beyond the quoted unit price to make decisions of whether to source their product domestically or offshore. Offshoring refers to relocating one or more processes or functions to a foreign location outside of our country. In order to make the right decision, you need to understand the concept of total cost of ownership to make the best decision. What is TCO? It is an estimate of direct and indirect costs and benefits related to the purchase of parts. The Gartner Group originated the concept, and it has a variety of applications for different industries, including the real estate industry. So TCO includes much more than the purchase price of goods. For manufactured goods, it should include things like the geographic location of that vendor. Are they going to be close to you? Can you go visit them? Are you going to have low shipping costs getting the products from that vendor? What are the transportation alternatives? We have a lot of varieties of ways you can get products here in the United States, but if it's offshore, it's going to come from slow boat across the ocean. We have the cost of inventory. How much inventory do you have to buy, and what is that going to cost you as far as the space to store your product? Obviously, the bigger your product is, the more the inventory space is going to cost you. And some companies can actually lose all their cost savings that they saved by buying the part offshore by the cost of inventory, because there is a cost of that cash in inventory before you sell it. Then the quality controls. Are you going to get a product that doesn't have to be reworked, that's the quality that you want to have your name put on to be able to get your product into the market and have a good reputation for quality? What is the reserve capacity of that vendor? Are they going to be willing to start out low and build your volume up? Or do they have a minimum buy that's larger than you want to start with? And they aren't going to be willing to ramp down if your sales don't meet your expectations. So that's another important consideration. How responsive are they going to be to the fluctuations in your production schedule or design changes? Do they have the technological depth to be able to help you solve a problem? If you find there's a problem with, say, material selection or a problem in your design, do they have the ability to help you correct that problem and get your product to be at the quality level that you want to have for it? The search for low-cost sources is not anything new. It's been going on for the last 60, 70 years. It's a reason why a lot of North New England companies, textile companies in particular, switched to doing business in the South, because they had lower wages as right-to-work states. 25 years ago, a lot of manufacturers moved to their high-volume production to Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, and Mexico. That was accelerated by NAFTA in 1993. And then about 15 years ago was the push to go to China, especially accelerated after China became most favored nation status under the World Trade Organization in the year 2000. The decision to offshore is often based on faulty assumptions, such as overseas suppliers have the same morals and work ethics as we do. Longer lead times won't affect costs much. Overseas laws will protect our intellectual property. We can teach suppliers to meet our quality standards. Communication won't be a problem. We have internet now. We have Skype. We won't have a problem communicating. Travel costs aren't going to add much to the cost calculations, and our increase in delivery and quality costs won't be significant, and we can teach lean manufacturing tools to our suppliers. Well, in contrast, case studies show that these assumptions are far off from reality. The problems most often encountered with offshore vendors have been variation. Each lot takes weeks longer than anticipated to get to the U.S. Methods for producing products have gotten more complex, not less, raising costs. Company doesn't even know how many or even most of the hidden costs that exist, and the company loses complete control of quick changes to react to these hidden costs. Accountants measure hard costs, but they don't often measure intangible costs, often called hidden factories, because they keep everyone busy generating nothing tangible or of measurable value. Hidden factories indirectly produce many kinds of soft costs, such as loss of goodwill if your product doesn't perform according to what you say it will, loss of competitiveness, extended warranty costs if some of your rejected parts and products get sold on the gray market, where people expect you to come through with your warranty, and the legal costs with regards to intellectual property theft, etc. Here are some of the hidden costs that I've encountered and companies I've dealt with have encountered over the last several years especially. Currency fluctuations. We know that the value of the dollar to the yen and other currencies are changing rapidly, unexpectedly sometimes. Design changes, quality problems, legal liabilities, travel expenses, the time and effort to make a transition. This is especially true when you're moving the manufacturing of a whole product line offshore. Intellectual property infringement, poor communication, and the cost of inventory. So intellectual property theft is the most serious because China does not honor U.S. patents. So companies sourcing a product in China may wind up having a product identical to theirs in a short amount of time appear in the market made by a Chinese company at a much lower price. It's much safer to only have, if you have to go offshore for something, it's much safer to just source an individual part at a vendor instead of your whole product at the same vendor. You're just like giving them all the know-how and knowledge to be able to, you know, knock off your product and sell their own, your product under their name. Prime examples are we have the Chinese Mini One that looks exactly the same as Apple's iPhone, but costs half as much, and the Chinese Cherry Q, which is called the Avio in US, which is a part-for-part clone of the Chevy Spark, costing nearly half as much. So some businesses started returning to the United States. They're manufacturing about 5 years ago, actually more like about 6 or 7 years ago now, because it was actually happening when I was writing the first edition of my book in 2007 and 8. I already had some stories that had happened that I was able to put in my first edition of my book that came out in 2009. The problems had to get to the egregious level, and it was things like substitution of materials, inconsistent poor quality that had to be reworked, you know, stretched out deliveries that meant you couldn't get your product to your customers in time, communication problems, and inability to modify designs easily and rapidly. One example of substitution of materials was injection molded plastic parts for a company here in San Diego that makes miniature underwater vehicles. They're only about this long. They go down to about 1,500 meters. These parts were supposed to be 30% glass filled so they would be strong enough to withstand the pressures. They kept getting parts that were smaller than they were supposed to be. So they had them tested by an independent lab and they were only 10% glass filled. So they were not going to be able to withstand the pressures of being part of an underwater miniature vehicle. So now we have a lot of things happening that are changing this supply chain dynamics. We have oil prices that have tripled in the last 5 years. Labor rates were going up about 15 to 20% in the last 5 years, and this year they were projected to go up 60%. I haven't, you know, we haven't ended the year, so I don't know whether that prediction actually occurred. We have had, you know, component and material prices increasing. Automation has increased U.S. productivity, so making us more competitive against offshore. We have political instability going on in other countries. The exchange rate variables are affecting doing business offshore. And then we have this disruption from natural disasters, such as the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, where they couldn't get a particular color of black for the auto manufacturers because it was only being produced in that part of Japan. And then we have the U.S. dollar declining in relationship to other currencies. So our pricing has become more competitive. So a recent survey of North American manufacturers by Accenture, a consulting firm, said that 61% of larger companies were considering shifting from offshore to closer to centers of demand. 59% intended to pursue new supply options. 67% felt that being close to their customers was the top factor in their decision of where to source products. And then 57% noticed an increased cost of logistics and transportation costs. So a report came out in 2011 by the Boston Consulting Group that was very controversial. They were predicting that we expect net labor costs for manufacturing in China and the U.S. to converge by around 2015. And they recommended that companies take a hard look at the costs. And if your labor rate was less 20 to 30% of your union costs, then you will only be about 30% below U.S. level, and 10% of the savings will be exceeded by other offshoring costs. Now, nobody believed this when it came out, but within a year, we were already seeing that this prediction was coming true. And now, at the end of 2013, it's really evident that this is going to happen. It first is happening in certain industries. There's about 7 industries that they call tipping industries that are coming back first. Now, they aren't coming back to the whole greater United States. They're coming back to the lower wage states of the South first. So but they already have come back to states you wouldn't believe, like Massachusetts and Illinois and Michigan and Minnesota. So it is happening for certain products. So in 2010, Harry Mosier, who was president of GF Agi Charmy, a big equipment company, started what he called the Reshoring Initiative. In other words, returning manufacturing to our shores. And he came up with a worksheet calculator to calculate these hidden costs. And the objective of this Reshoring Initiative is to change the mindset of companies from offshore is cheaper to local reduces the total cost of ownership, and to train OEMs on why to source local and how to use his TCO calculator, and suppliers and unions how to sell local sourcing, to encourage more production to be near the customer, and do the best we can on the unlevel field now as partial alternative to protectionism. Well, I had already put in a whole section in my book on why it's important to understand total cost of ownership that came out a year before this. So I wrote a blog. I started blogging in April of 2010, the same month Harry was starting the Reshoring Initiative. So he actually was the first person outside of my existing database that I sent this blog to sign up for my blog articles. And then about 4 or 5 months later, I wrote an article on why it's important to understand total cost of ownership, and he contacted me and said, "You're writing about what I just started." So he trained me in how to use his total cost of worksheet ownership calculator and authorized me to be the West Coast speaker on the Reshoring Initiative. So I've been speaking at trade shows and conferences and etc. now since late 2010 on the Reshoring Initiative, returning manufacturing to America. I just spoke at the Design to Part show in Pasadena in October. So, and I'm speaking at our local supply chain group, APIX, in February. So what this worksheet provides is software for companies and suppliers and unions and entrepreneurs like yourself to use to be able to calculate this total cost. It's now a total, at first it was program that we could email to people to use. But now Harry's got it all set up on his website, reshorenow.org, and you do it online, and then it comes out with the calculation for you at the end after you put in all the variables. And I used to show what it looked like when I had the program, but now it's like pages, white pages, too much space. It just doesn't translate into me showing you what it looks like, but you can do it online. So he's gotten tremendous coverage. He was one of the top Industry Week's top 10, selected people for 2011 because of this total cost of ownership. He's been in the Wall Street Journal, Industry Week, on CBS and NBC, etc. So it really is a terrific tool that we can now use. So it provides a TCO for each source. It has flexible values that are 100% user selected by you, 29 cost factors including freight rates for 17 countries and duty rates and the cost of molds, etc., for tooling for making things. So it's easy to use. And here's what you can come up with. where you can compare the costs over a period of time, immediately and over time, to come up with what the real total cost of ownership is for that part in the U.S. versus, say, China. And where you can see by the time we get to, year 4, the costs are matching. So this is an important consideration. So what's happening is sourcing is moving home slowly. In the last couple of years, 61% are considering bringing manufacturing back. 15.3% of U.S. companies say they are definitely planning to reshore. 40% of contract manufacturers have done reshoring work. And this was at the beginning of 2012, so they were talking about 2011. At every trade show I've been to this year, I've gone around and informally interviewed companies that are exhibiting to see if they are experiencing reshoring. And 95% of them are. So it's not, it's becoming a phenomena now that people are really noticing. So we even have now a near-sourcing initiative in San Diego by Connect. They started it in early 2012, so this is just about finishing the second year. They're helping to connect manufacturers here in San Diego with local sources. They're using the database that was developed by the East County Economic Development Council called the connectory.com, which has been around for years, but it was not well known because they never really had a marketing person. So here's an example of a local company that reshored that I visited and took a tour of earlier this year. Solatube International. They make those tubular lighting systems for indoor use that bring sunlight into the home. And they were a late goer offshore. They went to China in 2008. Which was, more like 3 or 4 years behind the big outgo of manufacturing to China. And they made the mistake of getting in an enterprise zone. They thought that would be good because they wanted to sell to the Chinese market. Wrong place to go. Enterprise zone is good to go to if you're going to be exporting your products back to the United States because you get, rebates and benefits on tariffs. Wrong place to go if you want to sell into China. They had to pay tariffs to sell their products into China. Well, they have a very proprietary process for their material. It's a triple clad material, and they were afraid of losing their intellectual property on this material. So they came back to the United States at the end of 2011 to a new plant in Vista that we visited. And part of it was the rising costs of labor in China and overhead, the rising shipping costs, the cost of the quality problems, and that they found that they were more efficient in the U.S. So they did keep a facility in China, which they moved out of the enterprise zone into a regular zone, but they only assemble it. So the triple clad material is now made in the U.S. They ship it flat to China, and then it's rolled into the shapes to sell into the Chinese market. And they brought back their LED lighting and all their plastic injection molding also to their plant in Vista. So some of the advantages of sourcing domestically are obviously ease of communication. Your vendor here is going to speak the same language you do. Flexible delivery, you can get just-in-time deliveries. You can have Kanban delivery. You can get rapid turnaround on your prototypes. You can have reliable transportation. There's many choices for different kinds of ways you can get your products delivered. Smoother design changes when you're changing designs. Lower cost of inventory because of less space. You have to have less safety stock for your product. So you can be assured that you're going to have higher quality products, and you're going to have consistent dimensional specifications where the materials made according to your specifications in the right materials. Lower travel expenses when you have to visit the vendor, and you will have no intellectual property infringement, and you will have more favorable credit and order terms. Because if you're a small company and you're starting out, dealing with a vendor in China, you often have to pay them when the product ships, which is going to be 4 to 5 weeks before you get it. So you have that money up front that you have to pay for before you get to sell any products. Kanban means that you have, you actually have bins that are refilled by your vendor when that bin gets to a certain point. And maybe you have a 2-bin Kanban where when one bin gets empty, they fill it, so you always have one bin. This is usually for very small component kind of parts. So that's what Kanban means. So the reality is that, you know, we have some parts that are still more expensive in the United States that are the problem. And the most difficult thing to reshore right now is plastic injection molding, particularly the tooling. Tooling costs still are running about 1/3 of costs in China compared to the United States. So what I recommend is if that is where you have a real money crunch to get that tooling, have your tooling made in China and bring the tool back to the United States to have your parts run, because there's not a significant difference in the piece price now compared to what there used to be. And that way you will not be giving that vendor the know-how of your product to be running the parts and being able to maybe run a little extra to be able to sell on their own, etc. So you are safer as far as keeping your intellectual property secure when you only have, you know, the tooling made in China versus having the whole part made in China. And do not have your whole product made in China by one vendor if you want to be able to have any length of time of selling your product without having a Chinese competitor product out on the market to you. Yes?
Has that been a big mistake with American manufacturers?
Yes, big mistake. And right now also, China is mandating technology transfer. So any American company that goes to set up a plant in China has to teach the know-how and transfer the technology to that Chinese partner. It's mandatory. So you are, in essence, giving away the know-how of your product now. Now, you know, obviously, none of you are at the size where you're actually going to go get land in China and build a factory and have a plant. But that's what American manufacturers of that size are doing. And they are actually teaching and funding their future competitors. What stupidity. But that's what American companies are doing today, and that's why we're losing our innovation capability. Because what you need to understand is we need to keep manufacturing in America to be able to know how to design the next generations of those products. If we transfer the manufacturing of a product to China, we may never be able to manufacture the next generation. An example of that, American inventiveness invented the digital storage with first it was digital tape drives. We transferred that manufacturing offshore, and then we never had the know-how for the next generation of CDs and DVDs. We've never even had that industry in the U.S. because we transferred the technology production of digital cassette tapes offshore. So that's what happens when you transfer manufacturing offshore. You lose the technology for future generations of products.
Are those some of the variables that are calculated when you're figuring your total cost for it?
There is a percentage here in there for design. There is actually a percentage in there put in there for design. And the risk factors, even political instability has a little calculation. So you can calculate, you know, what risk you think you might have, and that is part of that TCO calculation.
Because if you're figuring more longer term and can see those variables, it's a little bit more easier.
Exactly.
It's easier to make that,
Right.
which decision to make.
Exactly. So that's, you know, that's why it is really something you need to be looking at. I have lost orders for $1,000 one trip to China, one way is more than $1,000 in airfare. You know, so it's pitiful that people, it was almost like herd mentality, like following, you know, lemmings off a cliff. It was go to China because you're going to save money, when nobody did any real calculations to know whether they were really going to save money in the long term, and nobody did the calculation of what's it going to cost us when we have a Chinese competitor coming out with a product just like ours, only cheaper. You know, we've transferred technology for making aircraft and everything you can think of now to China, which is why they now have, you know, they have planes as competitive to our warfighters, and they have, you know, carriers now, because we gave away that technology to them. They didn't even have to steal it. We gave it away. They have a written long-term plan to become the superpower of the 21st century. Do you want to be helping fund your future enemy in a war? So that's what you have to think of as part of your, you know, too many Americans have just done it out of pure greed. So that I've coined this term for the big corporations. I call them the multinational globalist corporations that have no loyalty to the United States anymore. So they just are the bottom line for what's best for their company, and they have no loyalty to the United States at all, because they have global business, and not the business in the United States now is just a small part of their pie. So outsourcing will continue. In fact, you know, more and more R&D for the medical industry is going offshore. Software design is going offshore. So it will be, you know, continuing to happen, but the desirable locations for outsourcing will change over time. I mean, if Africa ever got its political act together, it would be the next low-cost area to go to. Purely financial benefits, however, will erode over time. The challenge for us as Americans is to keep as much manufacturing as possible within the United States. Understanding and utilizing this TCO worksheet calculator will help maintain more manufacturing in the U.S. and help return manufacturing to America. So I'm available as a speaker for any organization you might be to. I do why we should save American manufacturing and what can you do, to groups like Kiwanis and Rotary and Lions Clubs and Optimists. So if you know professional organizations, Society of Manufacturing Engineers, IEEE, etc. I have spoken to all the San Diego chapters and branching out into Orange County and Riverside. So I'm available. This is actually my mission, to save American manufacturing. So it's my you know, what I'm doing, to my main focus. I have to make a living, but this is what's my passion.